I am calling the Wednesday, January 21st school committee meeting to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm recognizing Westwood Media Center, which is live streaming this meeting and recording for later viewing on its platforms. And we will now move into the superintendent's report.
Sure, thank you very much. And happy to start off, as we do each meeting, with some great pictures of our students. So we'll start here at Sheehan. On the left, you've got fourth graders that are solving multi-step problems during math with Mrs. Comer and Mrs. Guadagno. The student with the marker writes as the student without the marker explains their thinking. On the right-hand side, Dorian Cusick's fourth grade class did a mystery Skype where they connected with students at a school in Kansas. So happy to have share some things from Sheehan. I'm sorry, skip over one there for a second. We are very excited. On the left, you see members of the Westwood High School Quiz Bowl team who have qualified as a wild card to compete in the WGBH Quiz Bowl this year. So they are actually competing on Saturday. And they will be in for the title of state champion of the high school quiz show. Congratulations to our students and their advisor, Mr. Jared Sarcher, for qualifying. The episode will air in February. And then on the right, we have high school alums from the classes of 2025 and 2024 spoke to 12th graders about the transition to college during J-term shopping during this month. For our next slide here, we have students in Mr. Kohut's grade 8 science class at Thurston who created pet monsters using randomly gathered genes, which determine their physical traits when two monsters paired up. Candles and music set the mood for the monsters to combine and exchange genetic information. Here at Pine Hill, we have in the top left, each student made a zebra stripe as part of Inclusive Schools Week, and teachers read the book All My Stripes. I know, you all know. On the far right, you've got students enjoying their physical education classes, and yes, there has been some Patriots pride around the district, and I will leave others to comment more about that. Sorry, I skipped over one here. Here at MJ, you have kindergartners and grade 3 students working together as part of our buddies across grade levels and classrooms. And then on the right here, you have students at Downey who, pardon me for one second here. As part of their Snowflake Theme Week, all students created a snowflake out of pipe cleaners and beads during lunchtime that represented the uniqueness of all students and how together we make a great community. And on the left, Principal Deb Gallagher and I had the honor of being at the State House yesterday. We're kind of way back near the top of the stairs there, so you may not be able to pick us out. But Downey School yesterday was recognized as one of 63 schools of recognition in 2025 at the State House by Department of Education. And so we're happy to celebrate Downey's staff, Downey students, Downey families, and Downey leadership for the work that they've done. So thank you. With that being said, Maya, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, moving into the updates, chair update. So we have been thinking about different ways where we can reach out to the community and sort of, make ourselves more accessible. We've come up with a couple ways. The first is we each have individual email addresses, and that can be a little tricky for the public because they might not know who to email or how many to email. So what we've done is we've created a school committee email address. It's one email address. Of course, you can email each of us individually, but this email will be checked every 1 to 2 days by the chair of the school committee and also another member of the district administration. We will get back to you as soon as we can. We're just thinking it's easier. If you don't know who to contact, you just send it to this, and this email address will get to us. And we can also respond that way and keep track of responses and questions. The email address, which we should have thought to put on the screen, is pretty easy. Beginning is, it's schoolcommittee@westwood.k12.ma.us. It'll be on our website. I think we're going to start sending communications that will have it in there. So when you hear from the school committee, you'll see that email address as well. We just thought it might be a good way, and this is thanks to Dory's idea, a good way to reach out to us very simply and easily as opposed to trying to figure out who to contact. The other thing we are doing, so as everyone knows, we're going to talk about the budget today, and the way the budget process works is the budget is introduced to the school committee today. We have sort of a little bit of discussion about it. We raise questions. We've got our books. We'll ask questions. And then at our next meeting, there's a public hearing where the public can come speak to us, and then we vote the budget at the next meeting. That doesn't give the public much time to ask us questions, to really try and understand the budget. So what we're going to do is have sort of a special office hours between this meeting and the next meeting. So, and we're just going to make it open for people to come if they have any questions about the budget. We'll have a school committee member, Tim will be there, Caitlin will likely be there, and Lemma will be there. And we will be answering questions just about the budget in general. We're actually having two meetings. The first is going to be a special ed related meeting about the budget with CPAC is sponsoring that along with the district. That will be both in person and on Zoom on Monday, January 26th. And then that Wednesday, we'll be doing just a Zoom. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible for all other budget-related questions. And that will be at 7 p.m. An email communication will be going out to all of the families with this information, so you don't have to jot it down. But this is just a way of trying to make sure that everybody has time to absorb the budget, ask whatever questions they have, and then come to the February meeting fully prepared. I think what we're going to try to do in the future is have the first quarter office hours naturally fall between these two meetings, so we won't have to do these special ones, but we didn't do that this year, so this is how we're addressing that. Again, an email is going out tomorrow with pretty much all of this information, so you should be expecting that. Are there any other liaison reports?
Well, if the seniors' prayers are answered this weekend, you just may want to think about Monday, but
Yeah.
it goes without
Monday
saying that
could be a snow
WBZ
day.
is continuing to go up, so.
Yep, I'm getting lobbied at home.
We will see what the weather brings
Yeah,
up.
I mean, yeah, it's bigger and bigger, let's just say that.
Yeah, the seniors
Big,
are
finally.
fingers crossed there.
It's not necessarily a committee update, but I just wanted to note that, because I've had a lot of questions about it, that we're on your schedule and on time with the Director of Student Services search, and engines are running.
Yeah, so that process is ongoing, and what we want to make sure, I know with the, next week is the schedule to have finalist site visits. We will make sure that those finalist site visits do not overlap with the January 26th and January 28th opportunities to discuss the budget. They may be consecutive, but we want to make sure that people don't have to choose between one or the other as we develop that site visit process. And information about the timing for that will likely go out on Friday afternoon. Thanks.
Any other liaison reports? Okay. We now move to public participation. This is the portion of the meeting when members of the public can come and speak to us. We ask that people, if you're interested in speaking, you come forward, you give your name and your address, and you limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Is there anyone interested? If you're interested, come forward, I should say. This is for Dory. Oh, thank you.
Do we have time after to come forward?
This is the only portion of the meeting where people can come give public participation now. I mean, you can speak to us after the meeting closes individually, but this is the official come and speak to us time.
Okay, and this is about the building the Purchase School.
This can be about whatever you want to speak to us about.
All right.
Why don't you come forward?
My apologies, like I'm just winging it right at this moment. But my name is Kristen Dempsey. I'm on 565 Everett Street. I actually work at the Pine Hill School. It's a great school. I think it's a little bit bigger than what most schools need. So if we're I'm just curious and kind of concerned because I know we have to build other schools. I started off at Downey. My daughter went to Downey. She went to Thurston. She went to Westwood High. We loved it. I personally am a Downey fan just because it's small. Same thing with Martha Jones. They're small, they're sweet, everybody knows everybody. When we moved to Pine Hill, it was wonderful. Everybody there is amazing. The building itself, I do think it needs a lot of work. Number one, I don't know the specs on the building, but we have a lot of glass. I mean, a lot of glass. And from my understanding, none of it's bulletproof except for the main entrance doors, which I don't think that's very safe. So, like, if we're talking about schools, my concern is the safety of the school. You know, how it's built, construction-wise. You know, you guys have all been to Pine Hill, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So there's a lot of windows, and God forbid something ever happened. That was my first concern when we went in there. Are all these windows and doors bulletproof, and are they?
We can talk, this isn't like a back and forth.
Okay, well, I just didn't know. So I'm curious about that because everybody's a sitting duck, and that's not safe. Also, too, I'm in the WABA program, and we are on the second floor, which it's great, you know, because the kiddos get the practice of up and down stairs, but also, too, it's one of those things for safety purposes. And off topic of that, the Thurston School, all of our kiddos are eventually going to be going there. And I know that the Thurston needs to be redone, but what do you have for kids in the WABA program, the focus program, kids with different needs, different abilities? What is there, or what do you plan on doing for them? Because our kids, they're not like the typical, you know, 6th, 7th, 8th grader. They're more, you know, they're playful. They like, you know, the swings. They like the structures outside. You know, that's something that you have to take in consideration. And also, too, with the building of the project, regardless of what school it is, we don't need, like, just because bigger doesn't mean better. It's who's in the building that makes it amazing. The teachers are amazing. The staff, you know, everybody there is amazing. But what I'm saying is, like, we can't even half the time go out in the playground because of all the nature that's there, which is great. It's all, what is it, to the environment? What is that? It's native, all native stuff. But half the time the kids can't go on it because there's bees. And I can't tell you how many times these kids have been stung by the bees. It looks great, but if you can't use an area, it's pointless. So my thing is just take in consideration, like, Pine Hill does look nice from the outside, but you could downsize it. We don't need cathedral ceilings. We don't need all these windows. And that's a lot of money, you know? I mean, unless you guys have a plan moving forward, but we don't have any room to grow in that building. And there's a lot of new buildings coming in here. There's a lot of, you know, apartments being built. There's all this stuff. And where are we going to put these kids? If we're going to build, we need to build so that we can grow in it, we can utilize it, and it's safe. Like for the windows, if there was ever an emergency, say there was a fire, for example, they can't even get out the windows because they crank out and there's like this much room. You got to think of safety with kids, regardless of what it is, whether it's, you know, the bulletproof windows or it's this. It's
Got about 15 seconds.
okay, bigger isn't better. You know, it's taxpayers' dollars. We want the best for our kids. My kid's out of the district now. You know, she's older. But you have to take in consideration. We want to stay here, and we want our kids to have what they have. But my main concern is our WABA kids. You know, we need more for them. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. I'm going to close public participation, and we will move on to discussion items, the Special Education Review Report.
Sure, and actually, just before we do that, I should have mentioned, like, formally on the agenda was the Tech Quarterly Update. That's the update from our collaborative, as part of our requirement. If there are any questions, we can have that conversation, but just wanted to acknowledge that. At this point, I'd like to invite Bill Lupini and Karen Schmolker to come forward. For context as they're coming forward, so I know I've talked about this on numerous occasions. Actually, you're just pulling the chair. Probably easiest to come here to the center. If that's
what she's gonna
okay. Oh, perfect. Okay. Sorry, just saw you have the corner of my eye, Karen. My apologies. For context, so we contracted with Bill and Karen through Rebus Associates to conduct a review of our special education programming across the district. They've had the opportunity, and they'll talk about their process. We have just gotten the report as an administrative team. We're just starting to, we're just beginning the process of kind of going through it. So, over the coming weeks, we will have that discussion. We'll talk about what the implications are in the district. But I think it's really important to have the initial part of this conversation today. And the expectation is that we will be publishing this report shortly after this meeting. So With that being said, Bill and Karen, I will go full screen with this, and you can just let me know when you'd like to advance,
Okay.
and the floor is yours.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Evening.
Yes, we've had the opportunity to be here for some time now and engage, and we'll talk about some of the different aspects of the study. But want to thank everyone who participated in this work of helping us to take a look at programming and make these recommendations. You can go, Tim. Yeah, the purpose of the study, as delineated up front, was really to take a look at the current department and programs, consider revisions and reorganization. Particularly, there was an emphasis on providing some feedback on the current preschool program and your structure, which I know are some issues that you dealt with last year. Examining the integration of special education programs, and in particular, taking a look at your district curriculum accommodation planning and multi-tiered systems of support. And we have a number of recommendations, findings in each of these areas, I believe. Go ahead, Tim. Oh, sorry. Do you want to do this?
Next slide.
No, we.
Oh, you did already.
I did that
You're
already.
ahead of us. So just in terms of our methodology, as Bill said, we did a lot of sort of literature and budgetary review, looking at data. A lot of the data comes from DESE, so using DESE's DART and radar, and then data that was supplied by the district. We did a lot of interviews individually with senior leadership, with the principals, and then focus groups with special educators and general educators. And then we did a survey that was sent out both to parents and to faculty, and then analyzed the data for that. And then we spent a wonderful day in Westwood, visits to Pine Hill, Thurston, and the preschool program at Westwood High School. And then, as you see, you have the preparation of the final draft. And as Tim said, that is still in review as we finalize it in terms of the final report. Next slide.
The other part of that is I should just thank Alyssa for really
Yes.
coordinating all of this and keeping us on track and helping set up the multiple groups and individuals that we met with both in person and then sometimes online. She was amazing.
And then what you see, and so we looked at really a range of things, and what emerged from all the interviews and focus groups are what you see in front of you in terms of 8 areas of focus in terms of just thematically. You'll see through the report, it covers sort of a breadth of areas and a variety of things, but these were sort of what was most prominent and what we're really going to focus on tonight. So as Bill said, we looked at organizational structure and leadership, special ed rates, the continuum of IEP services, right from least restrictive all the way into your specialized programming and your sub-separate programming, areas around WABA, which emerged through our parent interviews and staff and faculty. Instructional assistants and ABA tutors was a very prominent theme through interviews, focus groups, and through the survey, and this was both with faculty and parents, and then looking at how are resources allocated. One of the things we spoke a lot about is Westwood being a fairly resource-rich district, but looking at the most efficient and effective way of utilizing resources, so we're going to look at that. And then, as Bill said, looking at the preschool program, and then really looking at what's happening in general education, right? What's happening in terms of multi-tiered systems of support, which is really all of the things that happen in general education before you get to special education. And so those are sort of the 8 areas that we're going to speak to mostly this evening. Next slide.
I think the other thing I should say there is there's a lot of text to these slides, and there's obviously a lot in this report. I understand you have budget discussions tonight. We probably won't touch on everything that's in the slides, and certainly won't touch on everything that's in the report. What we're going to try to do for you tonight is really highlight some of the main areas, knowing that you have a long night ahead of you. I do want to say that there were a number of things that you'll see throughout the report that are commendations. Karen mentioned the issue of resources, which is certainly here in some of our commendations. But you have many experienced leaders, passionate educators, certainly engaged families. We had a chance to meet with many of them. And certainly this is a place where people take great pride in schools, This is a district that's certainly proven in the areas we looked at being willing to meet the needs of its students. You've developed very robust programming and created a significant number of really quality specialized programs. You have very small numbers out of district. We're going to comment on that later on. And you offer an integrated early education program staffed by really wonderful teachers who we had a chance to talk with as well.
So one of the things, as Bill said, is, and it was pretty striking actually, is how many really long-term staff, people who've been here for decades, and people who both live in the district and work in the district. And on the other side of that is there's been some significant turnover. So while a lot of that was in the general ed realm, there's been significant turnover in the special ed realm. This is both at the leadership level and also most significantly, more recently, a lot of turnover in your ABA tutors and instructional assistants, particularly leading into this year. So that was emerged initially as a really strong point of focus. We started early in September, and so people were still dealing with the ramifications of what that turnover looked like and the experience of that for parents and faculty, particularly in the WABA programs. One of the things that also emerged is really structurally in terms of the department heads and how those functions and some of the expectations of the positions and the alignment of those. And as you all know, they function as Unit A positions, but their tasks and their roles and responsibilities are very much like a Unit B department head. And then we really looked at a number of positions that emerged, as you can see, nurses, psychologists, adjustment counselors, and really an area of tension emerged a little bit around extended school year, really just in terms of roles and responsibilities and who is responsible in terms of sort of pre-K through 22, looking at extended school year, which is really, you're running a summer program for many, many students in terms of the department heads. Next slide. Go ahead.
Okay. So we have some other comments later on about the ABA tutor issue in particular. But what we recommended here, and you'll find a lot of detail in the report, was really a implementation of a team chair model as opposed to the current department head model. That would allow you to have people who actually have as their function chairing meetings at each of your locations, and would turn those department heads more into doing some of the responsibilities that you have for them, which quite frankly they don't get to right now, around evaluation and other aspects of the job. We know and recognize in the report that that's a significant item to take on. As a fallback, I'll call it, fair enough, fallback position, we've recommended taking a look at the department heads and taking a look at the caseloads at each building, because every building, if you have X number of them and you have X number of buildings, that doesn't mean you should have one at each building. Shouldn't be working that way, and in some cases is right now, and people aren't able to even do the basic function of the job, let alone the supervision and kind of program development and all that you want them to do.
I think one of the things I wanted to add,
Please.
in terms of the team chairperson model, I think really what that stems from is you have a vast number of people who are actually running IEP meetings within the buildings. And so what we found was incredible variability, not just amongst buildings, but even within buildings and even within sort of grade level bands. And so while it is an investment in resources initially, it is, in certainly our experience, it is one of the most effective models around getting consistency, vertical alignment, and also around eligibility, tightening up eligibility practices. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in terms of where districts where eligibility is somewhat looser than it perhaps should be. And we're looking at services for students who might not necessarily qualify in terms of educational disabilities, who are being served in special education. And that certainly happens in in many, many districts. So it is one of the models that is the most efficient and effective way of doing that. I think the other piece of that is a lot of our teachers are spending a lot of instructional time on meetings, right? And responding to both. It's not just running your annual IEP meetings, it's also phone calls and contact. And so really looking at, is that also the best use of our teacher time in terms of from an instructional perspective?
The only other one on here that we want to mention now is, and we didn't take a position on this ESY issue. I think it's clear from our conversations with parents and with the department heads, other staff, that it needs to be clarified. Whose role is it? Who owns it? The ESY. Parents should know that. That shouldn't be confusing to anyone, and yet right now it is.
So just when you continue to go through this, it's helpful, like you did there, where you think there should be additional resources. So if I'm understanding that, a team chair would be an additional resource add.
It would, but I think
it?
what
Yeah.
you
It's just
find in the
helpful.
report, it's not a complete addition of that number, because what we suggested along with that is taking a look at the department head structure, where if you have the team chair model, you don't need one in every building.
Like the lead nurse, is that just changing a title on some, or is that additional?
Either. It can be either. Some districts do it with with a stipend for someone who's already on staff, and some districts do it with a true lead nurse who's an administrative role.
And then one of the things that I think is very apparent and really is a point of pride, and it should be, is just the level of robust programming and services for students on IEPs. And that's really across the domains in terms of both within the sub-separate programming, but also in students who are in full inclusion or partial inclusion. And the reputation, and many people said we moved to Westwood for the schools, right? And we moved to Westwood for the special ed services. I think along with that is you certainly have seen an increase in your special education rates, as you can see, to 21.3%. Now some of that, and certainly there's been the impact of COVID, and certainly COVID impacted many districts, but many of your like comparison districts have not seen this type of increase. Even during COVID or post-COVID. And so when you look at sort of both the resources and the demographics, it's certainly something to pay attention to, is what's driving the increase. Now, certainly the whole state has increased, so you're at 21.3%. Massachusetts is at 21.1% as a state, and you've certainly seen that increase in the last couple of years. But again, looking at sort of the districts you compare yourselves to and the districts that DESE compares yourself to, you very much are on the high end in terms of rates, which is not necessarily what one would expect, as I said, given the combination of your demographics and resources. So that's something to really look at in terms of what's driving that, and also what are some of the pieces in terms of what's happening in the pathway between general education and special education that we're seeing these rates continue to move up. And then really what that is looking at, so you want to sort of draw the through line back to say, okay, what's happening in terms of general education, instruction, intervention, supports, progress monitoring, and really looking at, is there tight coupling in terms of those general education supports, what is happening in those areas. And so, next slide. And so often when, and again, this is often a function of high-performing districts and systems, when there isn't, and resource systems, is when there isn't sort of enough of that push in terms of really developing sort of robust systems of supports within your tiers. Kids often move too quickly to special education, and often unnecessarily to special education. And so we're going to talk more a little in the reports around some of those areas. One of the areas that was identified was in early literacy, and in looking at what's happening within general ed in terms of early literacy. And the other area that came up both in your data, in terms of your eligibility criteria, which we'll touch on a little bit later, was around executive functioning. And one of the things that we certainly see as students move into your middle school years, where you get an increase of complexity and demand, again, without those robust general education structures around both structures and supports and instruction. In executive functioning, you often start to see students with much milder disabilities either starting to be served almost in anticipation of middle school, in terms of being moved onto IEPs. And again, many of those students do not necessarily need specialized instruction, which is what's critical in terms of special education, but they really need accommodations and supports and instruction. So that sort of emerged as a key piece. And your second highest eligibility category is ADHD. Is health, of which ADHD is the component of that. And that's not necessarily typical in terms of what are your sort of first, second, and third largest disability categories. So again, just something to take a broader look in, and particularly at your middle school years, where I think you have about 36% of students between your IEPs and 504. So that's saying almost 1 in 3 students have a disability at the middle school level by virtue of the number of students on IEPs and 504s.
So if you look at the aggregate number in elementary and in high school, those look like a comparative districts, and it's a middle school, I don't want to say issue, middle school's way out of whack, or is it everything a little bit above?
It's everything a little bit, and then you certainly see this significant bump up in your middle school years.
And there's some variance among the elementary data,
Yep.
quite a bit, in fact.
In comparison, districts, do they see, even if it's not as great or not as, total is not as high, do you see an increase in sped service at the middle school level as well? In
many places where some of those general ed kind of systems and structures, and again, particularly around executive functioning, in places where there is more of a sort of a consistent system in terms of advisory instruction, you see less of that. But there is definitely a bump up in middle school in many, many districts. And then often, and you would expect it to go the other way, high schools often have much more of that in terms of small group classes, and there's much more variety, and students then bump up into middle school and start leveling off into high school. And so then you really want to look back and say, are those middle school years, were those students really requiring an IEP, or is it really about something else that we could do in general education? And again, I think some of this is also about special ed it is the least effective and efficient system to serve struggling students. So it isn't about, special ed is designed to serve students with disabilities, right? It's very labor intensive, it's very bureaucratic, it's very paperwork heavy. And so it isn't, when you look at, people say, well, what's the problem where we serve kids, right? It isn't from both at a fiscal level, but also in terms of instructional efficiency. It's just not the most efficient, effective model.
And do you lump 504s in there, in that category as well?
So 504 is really around, 504s are accommodation plans for students in general education.
Okay.
Next slide.
So again, we mentioned up front that you do provide a very robust and high-quality set of services. Many people remarked to us that it was greater than people could see in out of district placements. I think that's a finding based on Karen's review of some documents. And your rate of out of district is very low. We, as Karen just said, particularly at the level she was talking about, it's apparent that some students with and without disabilities are being served in special education. That was very apparent to us.
I think a really important strength is the level of commitment of Westwood to keep your kids in district.
Yes.
And that was very much, a point raised by parents and teachers alike, and you see that in your rates, and so I think that's a real important strength within the district, and it's also a commitment to the depth and breadth of your programming. Is really excellent in these areas. So I think really, I think when we talk about the efficiency and effectiveness of special education, I also want to make sure that, what people are also hearing is the depth and breadth and the quality of your special education services at the same time.
Do you want to talk about this?
Sure. So some of the other pieces that emerged both through review of IEPs and talking with, again, both parents and faculty, and this also emerged very much thematically through these surveys, is where students are being served, and with a perception by many people, and it's obviously their lived experience in terms of teachers, that students are often pulled out of general education too much and too quickly. And this was particularly highlighted in terms of early literacy, where by design and not by intent, but just by structural design, students are often receiving their specialized reading services at the same time as general ed literacy blocks. And often students need a double dose and do need to and should be receiving some of that foundational literacy work. Not all students, so it should be individualized, right? So that was one of the things that emerged in terms of pull-out services in general, and whether more students could be receiving services that are push-in, but also that it shouldn't be by design, that students are coming out of your classroom, particularly for your general ed instruction, and particularly in literacy. The other area that emerged, and again, this was both through the interviews and surveys, but also through looking at IEPs, is a really high level of A-grid consultation. So that's your consultation with staff, and again, your C-grid services, right? And so that's staff consultation, and your C-grid is students coming out of the classroom to receive services. And why that's, again, as I've said, sort of the C-grid piece is, again, because students are out of the general education environment. If they need to be for FAPE, that's their LRE, absolutely. But really thinking about that on more of an individualized level and sort of doing a little bit more of a deep dive into IEPs to sort of say what's happening there. I think the other piece about the grid of consultation is, again, thinking about are we overloading IEP grids such that staff are consulting to the extent that it's also pulling away in terms of instructional time. So those were just two areas to sort of, again, look at and do more of a deeper inquiry. And then the other piece that emerged quite consistently was what's happening in learning centers, right? So when students are in learning centers, are they receiving specialized instruction, or is it more focused on study skills and getting homework done, which is really not the purpose of learning center and of specialized instruction. And so again, it was just looking at what's actually happening in terms of IEPs and service grids and the level of instruction. Next slide.
Can I ask a quick question related to the students getting pulled out of gen ed for instruction? Is that exclusive to students on IEPs, or is it also referencing like the small group work that gen ed students are doing surrounding like kids who need a boost in literacy and math?
That was specific to students on IEPs, where it very much emerged in terms of the schedule,
Yeah,
and that's where it's structured.
We're not saying it doesn't happen there. We
Yes,
weren't
we
asked to
just-
look at
Okay,
that.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's see, what do we want to make sure we talk about here?
Do you want me to-
Well, go ahead.
So
Go ahead on this.
I think similarly, in terms of, and this emerged more sort of at the middle and high school levels, as you can see, was really looking at sort of a conflation of whether students need accommodations or specialized instruction with the need to guarantee good grades. And so really, again, it's really looking at what is the purpose of, and this is both on a 504 and an IEP, in terms of what are students needing in terms of specialized instruction, and that the purpose of it is not necessarily around grades, right? Both 504s and IEPs around what do students need for FAPE, right, in order to get their entitlement around a free and appropriate public education. And then some of the other areas are, and again, we spoke a little bit around this, is that really looking at the vertical alignment of services and supports really through programming. And so that's at your levels, elementary to middle and high. Some of that is programs of all different names. And there's a lot of sometimes confusion for parents at transition points between what happens between elementary programming into your middle school programming and into the high school programming. The other thing that emerged, both at the teacher level and actually at the parent level, is just entrance and exit criteria. How do kids move into a program? What are those criteria? And then also, what is, when students make progress, how do students move out of those programs? And really looking for clarity around those areas. We really touched on this before. This data point was a little striking just in terms of how much above sort of the state average it is in terms of health. And as I said earlier, a lot of that is around ADHD, which again just is an area to look at in terms of what's happening. Many kids with milder needs in this area are often well served in general education. And so again, it's just another area to say what's happening in these areas. And certainly, a lot of it when Bill and I do some of these reviews, it's beyond the ability of us to sort of really dive deeply into that, but that very much emerged as a data point and a finding that we would recommend doing follow-up. And we spoke about the percentage of students on IEPs at middle school and sort of what's happening in the intersection between those two things. Next slide.
Before you move on, I think this middle school level is really interesting. In the 504 and IEP relationship is interesting. I wondered if did you find that 504 students with 504s, do they receive skill building around, for example, executive functioning or ADHD management as part of their 504, or is that only with an IEP?
So generally your 504s are around accommodations, and so what you see a lot on 504s is more extended time, seating, those sorts of things. Your specialized instruction would come on an IEP, but often in these areas it's not necessarily specialized instruction. Often it is all kids need a layer and a scaffolding around executive functioning that really should be layered in across every content area as a skill building for all kids. And then for kids with disabilities who need the specialized on top of that, you've got your first tier, right? So that's when you talk about tiered levels of support, your first tier would be what everybody gets in general education. If it isn't in that layer, then you don't really have much place to go other than you're either on a 504 or you're on an IEP.
Thank you.
What's your hypothesis? I mean, we must be one of the highest in the state. If it's 27 compared to 15, what's your hypothesis on what's driving this? You don't know. It's okay if you don't know.
No. What's driving
I mean, that's a staggering number. I mean, if the median is 15, and that's 27, I bet that we must be in the top 10, 15 districts in the Commonwealth. Am I wrong? On that stat.
I don't think we'd know that.
It's okay.
I don't think we know that.
I mean, I wouldn't be, but it is high, and it is an unusual in terms of. Again, for me, it was unexpected. I was expecting to see autism as so again, it's just. But in terms of hypothesizing,
It's okay.
But I do think. Again, Westwood is a very high-performing district. It's very competitive, and so I think as you get into, as I said, middle school and high school, things that students have been able to compensate for, and things that for many students are very mild, everything ratchets up. And so again, without that initial layer, you move kids. Kids move either onto a 504 or an IEP often more rapidly than is needed. And I want to be clear around, this isn't about students who require it for FAPE, right? This is really about thinking about, do we have many students, again, with our data, where it's indicating that maybe students are not requiring it for FAPE, but if the services are in the special ed box, you're going to put the children in the special ed box to get those services.
Can I ask a question? My understanding was that the majority of students who only had ADHD as their sort of diagnosis were on 504s, not on IEPs. Are you saying that is not the case, that they're on IEPs?
I think it's a broad mix.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
And
does
that's not common to Westwood. You know, I think kids, again, if you only need an accommodation, you would be on a 504. If you need specialized instruction,
you'd be on
you know,
an
so it's
IEP.
less about the diagnosis and more about how that diagnosis manifests for the child. I think what, again, the inquiry would be is, are we serving kids who really could be served through general education instruction and accommodations? Are we serving them in special ed, and could we be serving them within general ed?
Okay. And did the 27.4%, did that delineate between kiddos who were on 504s or those who need the specialized
That's
instruction?
IEPs. That's your IEP.
That's the IEP rate?
That's IEP,
So
yeah.
if you added the 504 on top of that, it's a higher number?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just for clarification, right, the 27.4 is the percent of students on IEPs with that diagnosis, not the percent of the overall population.
Correct.
Right,
Yes.
just
Correct.
for clarity.
Yes.
right?
With that disability, with that educational disability category of health. Not all of the kids in health have ADHD,
Right.
but many of them do.
As their primary category or any category?
The data doesn't differentiate.
Okay.
And we've also changed with the new IEP in terms of primary and secondary. So we'd have to dig in the data to answer that question. Yeah.
Oh, there were other recommendations here.
Yep.
Finish that off.
So I think we've pretty much spoken a lot about these, really looking at, so this is within your specialized programming, is really just articulating the continuum of services from pre-K through 22 so that it's really clear for both parents and staff. I think there's a lot of anxiety around your transition points, and this is for parents with kids in specialized programming, and so I think some of that just transparency and communication can be really helpful. And then really looking at, your instructional models, obviously, literacy was highlighted. And so that's just something to pay attention to. And then the other area that did come up is that, and again, this is common and happens in many districts, students will be on an IEP for one area, and then because they're on an IEP, other areas or content areas get added. And so, for example, you might be on an IEP with an SLD for reading, and then you get a math goal added, but there are no disability-related needs in math. And so that was one of the other areas in terms of looking at. And that's around, again, efficient and effective use of your resources in terms of just looking at, your IEP should be around, all of it should be around disability-related needs. And so sometimes that sort of, people call it IEP creep, that, again, just because you're on an IEP, you might need math intervention, but that should be happening in general education because you don't need it in terms of specialized instruction. So that was just another piece that was pretty thematic in from a lot of sort of teachers' perspectives.
Can I just say that this first one is really important? Rebus Associates has, I think we're now up to about 10 of these that we've done since we started doing this work. And I've been involved in all of them. And what we hear time and time again, including in your district, are comments from parents in particular around this first area of, I just want to know what happens for my child when they go on to the middle school, when they go on to the high school. I'm not necessarily looking for a very constricted through line, but I want to know what the possibilities are. What's there? Right, for them, what kinds of things are there. And we heard in a lot of those interviews that people, you may think you're being very clear about them. They don't know necessarily. They want to know more.
I 100% agree with you. That was probably the most common question I answer
Yeah.
about special education
Yeah.
in Westwood is like, they're doing this in elementary. What is that called in middle school? And then what is it called in high school?
Yeah, and we
Yeah,
heard
there's,
some
like,
confusion
concern.
about whether two programs were merged into one at the middle level, those kinds of things, which, when we inquire, people who work with you gave us great answers, right? But they don't know.
Right, exactly. Mhm.
And I think there's also a reality piece on that students with the same diagnoses and also the same educational disability category may well be served in very different programs, right?
Right.
And so again, just having that level of clarity and communication and transparency around that, I think will be really helpful for parents.
Yeah.
Next slide.
A theme that runs through this is around professional development. You'll see it in the sections on the MTSS system, et cetera, just in terms of making sure regular educators, special educators, in this case, that people are getting professional development on how to monitor and provide oversight for IEP services and designs. Talking about having a very strong, well-understood, well-implemented district curriculum accommodation plan, which, like we find in many districts, is not as strong as it needs to be and needs some work, both in its development and in terms of the professional development goes along with teachers, which is more of a long-standing kind of a implementation to make sure it happens. Next slide.
Spoken, touched on this. And so one of the things, and as I said, we started right in September, right? And so we came in when the district was really dealing with the loss of many ABA tutors and
Yes.
instructional assistants. What's really clear is just the level of deep appreciation for the instructional assistants and tutors amongst parents and families and faculty. They are critical. As we said, there's a lot of secret services in which your ABA tutors and instructional assistants are very, embedded in that work. One of those areas is really looking at what that role is and what those responsibilities are. The other piece in terms of, so that was the one piece, and actually I jumped ahead to actually the staffing piece, so when we get to that. So that was the first part in terms of WABA, was really looking at that staffing piece, and we'll talk a little bit more around when we looked at sort of comparison pieces. I know you're in negotiations. I think the other piece that we looked at in terms of both looking at IEPs and looking at the programs is just a lot of the programmatic elements that you would expect in programs that are like WABA in other districts are very much encoded into the IEPs. And so really looking at what's programmatic and what is individualized for students in terms of FAPE. One of the recommendations that we do make is to really do, and part of special ed, and it's part of the requirement from DESE, is you do program reviews on a cycle, and there hasn't been a program review of the WABA program in a number of years, and it's certainly something, one of our recommendations is to actually do a full pre-K through 22 program review. As I said, the program has robust services, but to really look at, one of the things that emerged from certainly instructional assistance is what sort of that work quality is like in terms of both services in the school, home-based services, and obviously, what happened in, as the school year started this year had a huge impact on people's morale within those programs, both for the staff, but obviously for teachers and for families.
That piece is in a separate
Yep,
recommendation
yep,
that we'll get to.
yep.
Tim, if you would advance it to the next slide. Right, so this is what Karen was talking about. We're recommending here that separate program review for that program with someone who specializes in this kind of programming, and Karen mentioned a number of these, but we would recommend they look at the programmatic elements, the transition between elementary and middle and high, of the impact of the current model and structure on staff quality and work experience and retention, assessing the purpose and provision of home-based services. We heard a lot about very different understandings among people as to what the purpose of home-based services is. It's very important that element be well defined and understood. And examining the curriculum and instructional models that are being utilized in the program. You have a great program. You have very committed people to that program. You have wonderful parents who really advocated both with us, and we understand on a regular basis advocated for their kids. The program needs a look to make sure that the program's doing what it needs to do in those areas, and that people all have a great understanding of what that program actually is.
Next slide. And so we've already touched upon this piece. And again, some of the things that were attributed were salaries and working conditions, so it wasn't just sort of compensation. You can go to the next slide. And so again, recommendation, and we understand, this is a negotiation year, is to really look at your comparison districts. Many of your comparison districts have had negotiations in the last couple of years, and so you're lagging in terms of those rates in many areas quite considerably. And so that's obviously a recommendation to sort of look at that and look at sort of equity and parity in terms of comparison districts. And I think the other piece, we heard a lot from staff around that sometimes it was thought that these were just sort of pathway positions, and to really sort of think about, are there ways for people who want to stay in Westwood and are committed to Westwood to really create pathways to licensure in terms of educational pathways. And so that was that piece around that many people really want to have their careers in Westwood.
And there are districts, I mean, we made a couple of suggestions here around professional development and around some kind of licensure program. There are many districts that have done a number of things, including those beyond that, in terms of incenting those people to stay, to move into teaching positions, whatever it may be. We heard from some people, it's in the report, that in certain buildings, they don't feel respected. They don't feel valued, right? Others in those sessions made sure to tell us, that's not true in my building, right? That's the good news. But in some places, they don't feel that their work is valued by the professionals that they work with. And so, what we heard coming in was this whole piece about, there's higher salaries in another district, and that must be why people looked. It's not the complete picture.
That's helpful.
We've really touched on most of this. One of the things that really emerged, and you can see from the data, is there's really both wide variability in terms of numbers of students on IEPs in buildings, and also level of complexity and level of need of students on IEPs. And the staffing patterns and ratios do not always match with that level of complexity.
Right.
And so that's just something to look at, both a caseload and a workload analysis across domains. So this is both your specialists, your guidance counselors, your adjustment counselors, your psychologists, your teachers, to really make sure that there's equity and parity between schools. And the place where it was really most pronounced was at Pine Hill. Just in terms of, again, level of need and complexity, and this was both at the administrative level, but also at the staffing level and specialist level.
And that's if you normalize. We had some special programs at Pine Hill.
Yes.
If you pull those out, this is the case. You know what I'm saying? We have more programs at Pine Hill
Yes.
than WABA. But if you
Yes.
pull those out, this is true as well, I guess.
If you
Normalize for like the fact that you have some specialized, like WABA's there.
Correct.
If
You know what I'm asking?
If it was,
Yes,
if it was
yes.
not,
If there were no-
that would change the equation,
Okay.
but it
Absolutely.
wouldn't diminish the need to do the examination.
Okay,
Right.
okay,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and so what we recommended here is what Karen was talking about, the caseload and workload analysis for your special educators, psychologists related, all these people, to figure out what its staffing level really looked like that you need at each building, given the programs that are someplace as opposed to not someplace else. Yes.
And as we said, it's not just about your numbers, right? There's a higher number of students on IEPs, but your complexity, your range, the mix, the whole, sort of the whole gestalt there. And then what also emerged, and again, this is specific to Pine Hill, is really looking at professional development needs targeted at the needs of the students in the building, and therefore the needs of the faculty, in order to really address the needs of those students most efficiently and effectively.
So the preschool program, first of all, we were tremendously impressed with the people who work in those programs. Just the ability we had to talk with some of them, to observe some of their work, they're doing amazing work. One of our findings is that placing the WABA preschool program as a single preschool offering. Now look, the best situation, this is my opinion, the best place would be to have your preschool programs in one location, given the classroom space, the other space that you have available here. That's not going to happen. But having that as a singleton doesn't work for that program. Doesn't work for those educators. Doesn't work when kids can benefit from being included with other kids. It doesn't work to have students put in a car driven over here so that they can have an inclusion experience, and that's what's happening. Given that there was no space here, you clearly, because of enrollment, because of the waiver issue that I know you spent some time talking about last year, and the needs to provide some programming, longer day programming in integrated classes. I think I'm going to get to the recommendation. Tim, would you flip that for me? Thank you. You operate a program which is full day and half day, attending the same classes. You utilize classroom educators as part of the intake team. In a perfect world, given your space constraints, you'd probably have 2 locations for preschool and have those programs in those 2 locations so that you'd make sure you had the right array of programs at each of those places so that kids could be included, could move from classroom to classroom. You would add classrooms to make sure you could meet the needs of those students who need fuller day program as opposed to those who choose a half-day program. And one of our recommendations was around having a dedicated intake team. Rather than having teachers out of a classroom and having to shut down programming for half a day on one day a week so that they could do that work. A number of districts operate a dedicated intake team that do all that work, so there is not a need to remove instruction from students any of those days of the week.
Next slide. Okay. And so finally, again, sort of kind of coming full circle in terms of looking at tiered systems of support. There's a lot of really good work that is already ahead in the district in terms of the work on universal design for learning, accelerated curriculum review, particularly in literacy, which we've touched on. And then there's really an incredibly deep bench in terms of expertise around leadership in both general ed and special ed, even though many of them are new. That is really a huge strength in terms of moving this work forward. Next slide.
So, like a number of things, we found the level of understanding and certainly implementation of an MTSS framework and the DCAP to be uneven across the district. That came out in a great deal in our interviews. We heard and we don't sort of put down singletons, but a widely expressed sentiment was that the district does not do MTSS or RTI. We give every child what they need, so they don't need it. And we heard that a number of times in our interviews. You have a wide variety of regular education intervention strategies used across the school district. It appeared in a number of our interviews that significant numbers of people don't have a great understanding of the conceptual framework of MTSS, let alone what it would necessarily look like here. And there's a viewpoint that special educators are saviors who sweep in and take care of student needs.
Next slide. One of the other things that emerged, and this is often an unintended consequence often of having resources, is sort of a mindset around educator beliefs around what students are capable of. And this came up a lot in terms of not even just in sort of the special ed environment, just the notion of over-scaffolding and support. People talked a lot about the words learned helplessness, came up a lot in terms of, is this overloading of services increasing students' independence or leading to learned helplessness? Some of the other things in terms of just, systems and structures is really around all the buildings work very, very differently. And that it's sort of seen as it's kind of, this is how we operate in terms of everybody doing things very, very differently from building to building. Many people expressed it, certainly, and this came out at the elementary, that it's not necessarily a team working together around consistency of practice. And then one of the pieces that came out is some resistance to sort of systems or programs or recommendations that come from DESI. And this was very much felt in terms of MTSS and certainly around educator evaluation. And so there's certainly a lot of valuable, robust work that has come out of DESI in the last number of years. Their MTSS work particularly has been very good. Their work around foundational literacy. And so just something in terms of, I think, mindset in terms of some of those pieces to kind of think about and consider in terms of, again, thinking about consistency of best practices across the district and alignment of those.
Yeah, I just feel the need for this plug, and Caitlin heard this speech already. I worked as a superintendent for 27 years. Not a great fan of a lot of what came out of DESI, and had many interesting conversations with many, many commissioners during that time. The work that they've made available to the field in these two areas in particular is extraordinary. Hard for me. It's really terrific work, and while I understand the sentiment of sort of dismissing it because it comes from them, that's a mistake here, a big mistake.
I'll take your word for it. I just have a lot of memories of those masks and public health policies.
Yes, indeed.
But I'll take your word for it. Thank you. Exactly. Dropped on a Friday at 5 p.m.
There's not appear to be, at least in our work here, to be a multi-year professional development plan delineated of what will be done, how's it going to be done, and what the indicators of success are. That's very important. And I said this earlier, it should be noted that if you had these plans, if you had an MTSS plan, if you had an educator evaluation plan, those things take years to make sure you get in place and get right. So this isn't a quick fix.
Yeah. And so really this is sort of your long-term kind of system work, system change efforts, really looking at the development really from sort of your tier 1 instruction all the way through. And one of the recommendations, which is not up on the screen, but we do make, is really having a district-led MTSS design team has been an effective strategy in many districts in terms of really, you need general education teachers, you need special education teachers, you need your leadership, you need really your equity people, everybody coming together in terms of, learning together and driving the work. And it is multi-year sort of system change work that will happen, as Bill said, sort of over time. Next slide.
Yeah, so one of the other things that we found in a number of, did we list those areas? I thought we did. In a number of areas beyond some of what we've talked about, whether it's child study or whatever, is that what's in place from building to building looks very different. And we certainly understand that every building has different programs and different needs, et cetera. But a very successful strategy, I believe, for doing that is to define with principals, with others, what the non-negotiables are. What are they in child study? What are they in MTSS? What are they in whatever it may be? And then principals, building leaders have the ability to plan within that, but we at least have some definition of the basics of what we're all doing. Very successful strategy for me in my time as a superintendent, and it's a recommendation that we've made in a number of places that's been taken and worked with. Again, that is not top-down mandate. It is working with that group to figure out what are the non-negotiables around an example like child study. What are they? What are the characteristics of what has to be in place in every building? And then what are negotiables? I actually find that it enhances communication with building leaders. So we're recommending that.
Okay.
Yeah, and in summary, let me just say beyond this that this was a pleasure to work with people here. Thank you, Tim, Caitlin, and your entire team, Lori. Really wonderful to work with people. People were very engaged in this process. We always tell people up front, we're not going to use people's names in this because we want you to speak frankly. That was not a problem here. It was not a problem for people to speak frankly about what they saw as areas that were going really well and what they saw as areas where we need some work. And we certainly hope that this report is helpful to you as you move forward. So thanks for having us tonight, and thanks for having us in to do this work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll turn it to you first.
Questions?
Just going back, generally, first of all, this is incredible. Thank you. When you were talking about the non-negotiables, establishing those non-negotiables and having that be kind of a building by building, grassroots, if you will, that there's an establishment within the community there, would then those non-negotiables sort of be calibrated from building to building so that across the district we have non-negotiables that we're all agreeing to, although we might come to the agreement of them differently as.
That's a way to do it.
Okay.
I've also done it with those groups with principals, in terms of what that framework was, and then they worked with their team within that framework. Either way works. What you're trying to do is get to some level of consistency,
Right.
so that this actually is a district, instead of what one of my principals once said to me, a system of schools, instead of a school system.
Maybe it's a question for you guys, or what's next steps, I guess?
Yeah, no, and that's how I was going to
Okay,
close. So I
yeah.
think that may be a good transition, Tony, so I appreciate the question. Yeah, I mean, I want to thank Bill and Karen for the amount of time and depth, and I know that the scope kind of changed a little bit as we went through the process, which is why this is released later than it was, but I
That
certainly.
happens more often than not.
Yeah, and I certainly thought it was valuable, right, to include some things that were not necessarily part of the scope initially. As I said up front, like, we are going to, like, there's a lot of information here, and certainly these slides are just part of the larger 30-something page report that we all have at this point. We're going to be pulling together our admin council team starting next week to really dig into this, to figure out what our next steps are. So I can't answer that question explicitly tonight, other than there are some things that we got an inkling of in this report that you will see reflected in the FY27 budget. Not everything, I think, to your point, like around the department chairs, like, that is not a financially viable option on day one.
Right. Yeah.
Right, but the
That's
issue
right,
of, we'll talk about this more as we go through, but like places where we can make strategic changes that are consistent and aligned with the recommendations through the budget process, we're looking to do that now where we can. But what some of these longer term implications are, we look forward to having those conversations and talking more, so. And I think I'll also add, like, this provides a good roadmap too, as we are going through the process of hiring a permanent director of student services. Once that process is complete, like, this provides a roadmap for how to get to where we want to go, so.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with your budget discussions.
You gonna stay?
No.
Okay, so we move now to the proposed FY27 budget. Before I turn it over to Tim, I just want to give a little bit of context. As most everybody knows, the town of Westwood has one budget that's split up between schools and towns, the school and the town. And that budget, the funding comes, we're not a big commercial town. We don't have a big commercial base. So primarily the funding for the town budget comes from real estate property taxes. Massachusetts has something called Proposition 2.5. That is a statute that does not allow towns to collect in total more than 2.5% increases in taxes year over year. That doesn't mean that your taxes can't go up more than 2.5. It just means the town as a whole can't collect more than 2.5%. So that, of course, affects the amount of increase that the budget can go up every year. The past few years, we have seen significant increases in certain costs, but most instances we've gotten lucky for one reason or another, and we found funds where we were able to close that gap without too much pain. For example, one year Governor Healy superfunded Chapter 70 funds in an effort to sort of play catch up with school funding, and so we were able to take advantage of that additional state aid. Another year, we benefited from the Hanlon-Deerfield consolidation. We found efficiencies there. We benefited from those savings. This year is not one of those years. As people may recall, I've been saying, I think since September, that this is a very tough budget year for us. I think nationwide, we've seen increases in healthcare costs, and energy costs, and transportation costs. Everybody is feeling those on an individual level. Certainly, the town is feeling them as well. We, of course, have salary increases, which are contractual. And the result of all of this, particularly these significant increases in these external costs is that the district started off its budget review with these sort of higher costs from last year without an equivalent rise in funding, which from day one put the budget in a deficit situation. So I think what we'll see in this budget is that we had to, the district had to make some difficult decisions to find a way to close that deficit. We had cooperative discussions with the town. We feel that we came to a collaborative solution with the town on how to sort of split up the pie. But both town and schools are going to feel the pinch of this economic climate. I'm not sugarcoating it. It's not where we want to be, but it's where we are. So Tim is going to explain more as he moves through the budget summary. He'll speak to specific pressure points. I do want to encourage everyone to read the executive summary of the budget. It's only about 2 pages. That's going to provide further context for these budget changes that we outline. But I did just kind of want to set the stage that, this is not an easy year for us, and nothing in this budget came easily. And I'll turn it over to you on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that framing. And just before I get to the slides, you mentioned the whole budget summary is about 30 pages or so, but the opening letter that frames the narrative is 2 pages long. And I want to acknowledge, the first sentence in that narrative says, "I'm pleased to present," and I will say in the context of this room, I'm not necessarily pleased to present the budget that we have. But we're presenting the budget that we have, which we believe is the best we can do given the financial constraints that we're under. Sorry about that. So, I'll start with this is the slide we put up there to begin with. Annually, these are the drivers that, regardless of the fiscal climate, we look at how do we meet our contractual salary obligations, how do we meet other inflation-impacted costs, how do we address special education needs, and how do we work to continue to make progress on our educational goals identified in our district strategy. So for FY27, we started with a level services budget that assessed essentially what are the cost of keeping existing staffing, assessing existing salaries and fixed cost. We respond to changes in enrollment patterns and student needs. We always work to identify strategic additions and/or reductions consistent with district goals. And this year, where we are going to be talking about some material staffing challenges, is that given the financial pressures in building the FY27 budget, we've approached the reductions, you'll hear me say this again later, with the priority of preserving access to educational opportunities for students. The reality is education's a people business, right? You can't educate kids unless you have people in front of kids educating them. And 84% of our budget is salaries. So when we face financial pressures, particularly from areas not part of salaries, it places the pressure particularly on the salary component of the budget. So to start the conversation, the FY27 budget, I want to talk about level services. So when we determine the cost of maintaining level services, we identify what's required to maintain our existing educational and personnel infrastructure. So those are our contractual salary obligations for existing staff. Those are known non-discretionary, that's a key word, is non-discretionary increases in transportation and tuition. And for FY27, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, we're also impacted by a reduction in our federal grant funding for special education. In order to maintain our level services, our FY27 budget would require a 5.18% increase. As Maya just talked about, our current economic climate presents real challenges and constraints on what we're able to do in FY27. It puts a limit on how we're able to actually align with our improvement efforts. And Prop 2.5 places that upper limit on the overall budget for school and town together. And the 2 biggest drivers that are escalating at a rate far greater than Prop 2.5 can support are health insurance, that's not part of the school department's budget, but is part of the overall shared cost for the town, and special education, particularly in the area of outside tuitions. They greatly reduce the amount of available funding for other priorities. Our FY27 proposed budget increase, after our conversations with the town, and again, I appreciate Maya, I appreciate Lemma, I appreciate Molly Fitzpatrick, Stephanie McManus, Rob Gotti, and Bill Bruce for their conversations throughout budget steering. But our proposed budget increase is 4.31%. That is substantially below our level services percentage of 5.18, and just putting that difference in percentage in raw dollar amounts, that's a little north of $500,000 in the delta between what level services is and what the FY27 budget is able to sustain.
I do think we should note that that 4.31% is actually significantly higher than what our school budget increases has been historically, particularly for the past 10
Yeah, I'll show that on a
years.
future slide as
Oh,
well, too.
okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah. The other thing, right, and obviously we just had the report around special education, and there are proposals in this budget that address our need to make required staffing additions to ensure legal compliance with education regulations for special education. We also have some issues with English learner students in the district. And so combined with the need to make those staffing additions to ensure those things, and I see those staffing additions, and I'll talk again about this more later, is that they're investments that both address the immediate needs and are designed to bring longer-term stability and strength to our programming. But the result is in the now we have had to make material personnel reductions in other areas. And our proposed budget for FY27 is just shy of $61.3 million. To Maya's point
yeah.
about the percentage increases, you'll see this chart in the budget book. There are 3 years here that are significant outliers. FY16 and FY17 were the outliers that are there from when University Station opened, and there was a significant, because when Maya talked about Prop 2.5, it's 2.5% plus new growth. So when there's a significant amount of new growth in the community, tax revenue increases substantially at that point in time. We don't have that new growth right now. And FY24 was the year where there was an influx of Chapter 70 money, partly from Governor Healy implementing the Student Opportunity Act, and partially based upon some demographic changes as we expanded our METCO program to elementary school at that point in time. But you can see compared to other years, this FY27 budget is actually a larger percentage increase than it has been historically over most other years. So these are the raw numbers of the budget. So of our starting point from FY26 of $58.7 million, there's nearly a $2 million increase, a net increase for salaries for existing personnel. Fortunately, our biggest bargaining unit, which is the Westwood Teachers Association, we reached an agreement with them last year, so we are not in active contract negotiations. We are in negotiations this year with our IAs and ABAs, as well as with cafeteria. Cafeteria sits outside of the operating budget. It's in a revolving account, so that's not part of this conversation. But that is the net increase for salaries for existing personnel. I'll talk in a minute around some proposed reorganization as it relates to special education that would add 3.6 FTE at roughly $250,000 increase. But it means there are other staffing changes that's a net reduction of 6.2 FTE at about $660,000 decrease. The net increase to various non-salary accounts, almost all of that is related to special education tuition and transportation. I'll share some more details. There's a little bit for gen ed transportation and then some other items as well. But that net change is a $2.53 million increase up to $61.3 million. This is just what it looks like by categories. And again, you can see the one outlier here is the cost related to special education, which is almost exclusively driven by tuition and transportation. And we just differentiate between the difference between what's in the operating budget versus what's in all funds. This includes grants, this includes other things. I'm not going to go into great detail, but we show this for completeness. So I do want to start with this conversation around special education and non-salary changes. The most variable part of any district budget, and that is true this year, next year, 10 years from now, is in special education. You know, when Bill and Karen just showed that number of 3.5% out of district, that is 3.5% of our students on IEPs. As a whole, fewer than 1% of our students in the district as a whole attend out-of-district special education placements. That is an incredibly low percentage, and is a credit to the several district-wide programs that have allowed us to educate almost all of our students in district. But we continue to have growth in the area of out-of-district placements as the complexity of students' needs have increased, and as we have to address those challenges. Tuition rates for out-of-district placements, for private placements, are set by the state's Operational Services Division. You can see there was a massive increase in FY24. They have recalibrated that down a little bit closer to where it has been typically, as a 3.04% increase on school tuitions for FY27, as historically it was in the 2 to 3% range. But individual schools can apply for larger increases. Those applications are out of our control and are done at the state level. And some of those larger increases are up to 20% increase year over year for an individual placement. And I will say that as my colleagues in the superintendency, I was having conversations about this just yesterday, we are pushing the levers we can on the advocacy front with the state, with DESE, with the Inspector General's office around this particular issue. As the escalations are in a place that are unsustainable, not just here in Westwood, but across the Commonwealth. To show what these tuition numbers look like, this is the, I'm sorry, my apologies that the title should say tuition, not transportation. Transportation is on the next slide. But it's roughly an $800,000 increase just in out-of-district tuitions from FY26 to FY27. Almost all of that is in day tuition. Those are essentially private placements. We try to service students in our collaboratives if possible, but this reflects 28 students, I believe, that we currently have out of district.
So how many, what was that increase from, like 20?
Do you have a count offhand?
It's okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, I can make sure that you have that information. As it relates to transportation, when you have more students out of district, it also means you are transporting more students out of district. So the cost escalations here are both year-over-year inflationary costs in transportation and the essentially increased transportation runs as more students are out of district. This is another area where there is significant issue from a vendor perspective. And I will say that just to say that essentially statewide there are multiple names for the same company. And it is an almost monopolistic approach to specialized transportation in Massachusetts. When we talk about essentially non-salary as a whole and what those increases are, that first bullet, when I talk about non-discretionary increases, tuition and transportation are required. It's a $917,000 increase in FY27. We also have about a $49,000 increase. That's just the general cost escalation of the existing yellow bus contract. I talked about at our last meeting an increase in the athletic facility rental that's related to Canton Ice House, predominantly a little bit as well for golf and gymnastics, but that's a $25,000 increase there. I just wanted to note the decrease in athletic supplies and materials is not a decrease in athletic supplies. That is a budgeting item only because that is being offset. We're decreasing the budget because it's being offset by the fee increase. And we are taking an across-the-board 5% reduction in conferences and meetings, dues and memberships, other expenses. We don't want to hit instructional supplies as the purchasing power for instructional supplies has been diminished due to inflation. But in other areas of the budget, it would be irresponsible not to look to take a reduction elsewhere. I also want to talk about revenue assumptions. Circuit breaker, I'm not going to give the circuit breaker 101 conversation here, but essentially circuit breaker are the receipts that districts get from the state for extraordinary special education costs, mostly for out-of-district costs, but sometimes for in-district costs that exceed a certain threshold that's roughly around $50,000 or so. And a percentage of that money comes back. The way that we have always budgeted circuit breaker here is what we budget in FY27 is what we are receiving currently in FY26, which is based on our expenses in FY25. So we're looking back to what our expenses were 2 years ago. What we are finding in FY27 is that because our expenses in FY25 were suppressed, and this is related to that sort of some of these one-time, like pull a rabbit out of the hat budget miracles that we've had, that allowed us to get that budget over the finish line. Our revenue in our typical budgeting process for FY27 would see a reduction in circuit breaker that would break this budget even more. We anticipate that circuit breaker revenue going back up again in FY28, the circuit breaker budget going up again in FY28 because of receipts we're seeing right now in FY26. And what we don't want to do is ride this massive roller coaster of circuit breaker that sees multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars decrease in the FY27 budget only to have it come back in FY28. So we're taking an approach to flatten the circuit breaker offset. We're building in a $100,000 increase in FY27 and essentially taking some of that FY28 increase up front in FY27. So we're reducing the amplitude of that wave that we're riding, and we're trying to take more of a steady increase year over year as it relates to circuit breaker. In the area of grants, I mentioned a reduction in our federal IDA special education grant. We see right now in FY26 that grant went down by about $179,000. That grant is used primarily to pay for IAs in the district. We are hopeful that grant funding will increase for FY27, But given the current climate in Washington, I don't think we can count on anything on that regard. And we won't realistically know until July or August, which is way too late to do anything from a budgeting perspective. And so that is the reality of where we are in grant funding right now. The other grant reductions are slightly smaller. The Early Childhood Special Education Grant, our METCO grant, our Title II grant, which supports teacher quality. The Title II grant has actually increased following reductions from FY23 through FY25, so that has come back. But the federal IDA Special Education Grant is a significant hit that we've taken in this budget process. We talked at the last meeting, sort of directionally from the committee, approximately a 4% increase to bus fees, athletics fees, and preschool tuition. This is part of the commitment that we made to do a moderate increase each year, as opposed to not increasing year over year and then having to do a massive increase all at once. And so you can see those fees proposed changing from $290 to $300 student for bus fees, $320 to $334 for most sports and athletics. That'll bring an increased revenue of about $29,000 that we can use to offset expenses. Here's how we look in comparable districts in tech, both the bus fee and the family cap, and similarly the base athletic fee and the athletic fee family cap. Okay, we're going to move into the more challenging part of the conversation now, which is what do we do with all this and with all the pressures that we have. So as it relates to enrollment considerations, first, there is no significant change in FY27 enrollment at the high school or the middle school. And overall enrollment at the elementary level for right now is relatively steady from FY26 to FY27 projected. We know that we will see an increase in the next 5 to 10 years, or at least let me say we anticipate. I know we've had conversations about enrollment projections, but for right now we're remaining relatively steady. But as a reminder, the number of class sections is determined not by our overall enrollment, but by how those students are distributed across grade levels and buildings. And we continue to have the challenge we've seen for 3 years now about using census data to predict incoming kindergarten enrollment. This is what that chart is. We were, roughly 20 to 30 students away from 2019 to 2023, and then something happened in 23-24, and that trend continues where we have not been able to capture kindergarten enrollment in the same way. And so it is challenging and unpredictable to identify the number of kindergarten sections.
And did we pull is the census for this, what we think is the 147, or is it a different number?
It's in the same ballpark.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was curious, okay.
So in response to this unpredictability, in FY25, we used a methodology of assuming that we're going to basically level staff all of our kindergartens. That proved successful in FY25, from FY24 to FY25. We used the same methodology in FY26, and what happened was the distribution required us to add another kindergarten section post-budget. So for this year, we have 2 sections at Sheehan and 3 sections each at MJ and Downey. So to address this issue, knowing that that level of unpredictability basically creates even more budgetary pressure to the pressures we already have. So I had mentioned this to the committee. Previously we're proposing the introduction of buffer zones to our elementary school district maps for the 26-27 school year. We won't be introducing maps this evening. There's enough else going on that our plan is that we would share what those maps could potentially be in February. I know I spoke with Maya earlier today about the potential to call an additional meeting at the end of February so that we can have that solidified before we open kindergarten registration in early March, because we know that we will want to be able to do that.
So we'd look at the maps at our normal February meeting, have time to process them, and then have an additional meeting at the end of February to vote on the maps.
Yeah. But it's important to talk about the concept in the context of the budget conversation this evening. So prior to 23-24, for a few years, University Station was identified as a buffer zone between Downey and Pine Hill. And so the concept of a buffer zone is that students who are newly registering for school, which is primarily kindergarten students, but can include students who are moving in or coming from private school, for example, and other grades, would be assigned to one of 2 identified schools consistent with the goal of reducing the impact on class sizes. And while historically only University Station between Downey and Pine Hill was identified, if we want to do this in a way that both addresses our larger scale questions around kindergarten enrollment and distribution across schools, and we want to do this in a manner that has an equitable lens on it as part of our commitment to equity, then we would look to identify between each set of schools where districts border. So that's between Downey and Pine Hill. Pine Hill is the only district that Downey borders. You can't really have a buffer zone between Downey and anywhere else. Between Martha Jones and Pine Hill, between Martha Jones and Sheehan, and between Pine Hill and Sheehan. I think realistically, as we look at the concept of how we would do buffer zones, what we can't do is create a zone that would require increased transportation costs, right? So we're looking for areas where, I know we have places in town, for example, where a bus for one school is going down a street picking up kids on one side, and a bus for a different school is going down the same street picking up kids from the other side. Like areas like that are naturally areas that we would be looking to identify through this process. So the reason to do this is in Downey, MJ, and Sheehan, the number of classes per grade level, and you can see this when we look at the class size chart in a couple of minutes, has fluctuated between 2 and 3 sections annually based upon the enrollment in that grade level. As I said before, this year we have 2 at Sheehan, 3 each at Downey and MJ. By instituting buffer zones, the goal is allow us to plan for a combined 7 sections across those 3 schools. And that we would utilize buffer zones to basically flatten the enrollment where we need to try to stay within class size guidelines with 2 sections in 2 of the 3 schools and 3 sections in the other. In the budget, we identify those 3 sections at Sheehan, but the final determination will be based upon what actual enrollments are. But we needed to place it somewhere in the budget process. Okay. In the context of staffing changes, I want to start with just to reiterate some points I've made previously. So there's a little north of a $500,000 difference between level services need in the FY27 budget. When we combine that with the need to make required staffing additions to ensure our compliance with education regulations and special education, and for English learner students, the result is we've had to make material personnel reductions of a greater level in those other areas. And given the financial pressures in building this budget, we've approached the reductions with the priority of preserving access to educational opportunities for students.
Can you just explain a little bit what that means?
Yeah, so what that means is that there will be places where we will see increased class sizes. There will be places where we see that the impact is around providing additional support to teachers and other educators. There are areas, when I talk about preserving, like what we are trying not to do is we're trying, we just heard about the importance of having like a really robust multi-tiered systems of support. You can't have multi-tiered systems of supports unless you have multiple tiers for students to get supports in. So that's when I talk about preserving educational opportunities, students that need intervention, we're protecting them. When we talk about the litany of elective offerings for students at the high school, we're not talking about elimination of programs in that way. And so that's when I talk about preserving educational opportunities, that's what that context means. So I want to start with a conversation to build off of the conversation we just had before around special education and preschool. And so, as you just heard, we identified potential areas for revision and reorganization designed to increase the educational outcomes and support long-term stability. And these changes are designed to not only meet our immediate needs, but to build our capacity for the future, which will hopefully help reduce our future budget volatility. So there are 3 main drivers in the proposal that lead to these changes. The first is our focus program at Pine Hill. So Pine Hill was built with the focus program in mind. The focus program is currently located in the preschool wing of Pine Hill. It is projected to be an enrollment of 13 students for 2026-2027. That exceeds our space capacity. It exceeds our educational capacity with the staffing in that program right now. And that is a driver for a need to do something in response to that program, or else we're not able to maintain students in district. The second driver is our ongoing capacity issue with Westwood Integrated Preschool. We have a regulatory cap of 15 students. All of our current classrooms in the current school year are in excess by multiple students over that. And our preschool WABA program, the location at Pine Hill limits opportunity for student inclusion and integration. And so what we are proposing this evening is designed to address all 3 of these things. And so what we are proposing is first, an additional 1.0 FTE teacher for focus at Pine Hill. And I'll talk about more of these in detail in a second. The proposal to add an integrated preschool classroom to be located at Downey. And then that requires a teacher and it requires 2 instructional aides. The reason the FTE is lower is because of the work schedule in preschool. And then we would also relocate the preschool WABA classroom from Pine Hill to Downey to increase those inclusion and integration opportunities for students in our preschool WABA program. And then the consolidation of the peer program from Downey to Martha Jones. So we currently run 2 parallel K-5 programs, one at Downey, one at MJ. And we consolidate those to 2 classrooms at Martha Jones and allow us to create a lower grade and upper grade classroom at MJ for peer. And I'll talk about each of these a little bit more here. The increase in focused enrollment means we've exhausted our current capacity, both instructionally and space-wise, and we can't any longer effectively implement our specialized programming. So the addition of this teacher will address both instructional and space needs, with a new classroom to be located in a space currently used by the preschool WAVA program, which is directly across the hall at the entry to the preschool wing in Pine Hill. Just to give some context on the historical enrollment challenges at preschool, over the last 5 years, out of 15 total preschool classrooms, that's 3 classrooms a year for 5 years, we've exceeded our regulatory cap 10 times, including in all 3 classrooms this year, and preschool enrollment doesn't end. We have a continued obligation to meet the needs of students as they're identified of preschool age. And so opening a 4th integrated preschool classroom at Downey and moving the preschool WABA classroom at Downey not only addresses those capacity issues in preschool at the high school, but allows for the integration with age-appropriate neurotypical peers. And then finally, the peer program. The proposal to consolidate the peer program from Downey to Martha Jones will allow for improvement in student experience and instructional efficiency. It allows us to improve our age grouping alignment, identifying a lower group that can focus on the unique social and emotional early academic needs for students in the lower grades, and older grades can focus on the increased academic demands and social dynamics, and also has the additional benefit of being able to have staff collaboration within the program. As I said before, these are designed to not only bring stability to our current enrollment, but also in anticipation of future needs. And recognizing the impact that these changes can have on students and families, and you know, I know that we are reaching out to the families that are directly impacted by these changes to schedule meetings the next couple of days. I know from a broader perspective, you know, we have the meeting that we're having on the 26th, and I appreciate CPAC and Lauren Fortin as the chair of CPAC for working with us to organize and schedule this time for us to have deeper conversation. But we're committed to keeping these changes in place until such time as we need to contemplate larger scale redistricting. What I don't want to give any impression is that we are looking to move students on an annual basis. That's not right for kids, and period. Like, if it's not right for kids, like, that's the end of the conversation. But so we are committing to this until such time as we have these other larger considerations we need to have.
You can't guarantee that.
I can't.
I mean, we just
Yeah.
talked about the enrollment study,
Yeah.
the demographic study, and if you suddenly get a spike at Downey, is what they said.
Yeah.
I mean, you can commit to it.
Yeah.
You can say we don't want to, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to give a guarantee for something the next 6 years. I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
being realistic.
No, I appreciate that,
Gonna
right?
be-
And
I think the buffer zones will help with
the
that.
the buffer zones are designed to help with that. I
Won't
think there are.
solve it, but-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are other, not that these are things that we want to do, right? But we know when there are space constraints, there are other things you can do in the
Yeah.
interim, and that's, you know,
I mean, I'm saying
Yeah.
we don't want to do it, but I don't want to
Yeah.
give the false impression of, you know, like the demographic study showed, if you believe that or not, but that's a different conversation.
Just to talk about some additional changes in student services, the budget also includes adding a .6 FT psychologist at Pine Hill. Back in FY25, when we consolidated Deerfield and Hanlon, we had reduced a psychologist at that point in time. We had replaced it with an adjustment counselor. As our student needs have evolved at Pine Hill, we realized that we are not able to currently meet our testing and IEP service delivery needs of students in the right way, and that our adjustment counselor is basically not able to meet with our gen ed students because of the needs that we have in special education. So this is designed to recalibrate that. We also, this fall, had a DESE audit of English learner programming in the district. We are required to make corrective action to be in compliance as it relates to EL students in the district. In order to meet that and to help our students meet their English language acquisition needs, it requires an additional .8 FTE of an EL teacher. To the point that came out in the review about the need for greater consistency and oversight of special education in the district, the team chair model is not something we have the financial ability to implement at this point in time, but is a step towards recalibration and making sure that we are addressing this in a responsible way. We'd be adding a .5 FTE elementary student services department head that would bring that greater consistency and oversight based upon the number of meetings and the intensity of programmatic needs. There'd be no change at the middle school, no change at the high school, but this would create one department head at Pine Hill, one department head for Downey, Martha Jones, and Sheehan, and then would make permanent what is currently advertised but unfilled, which is the preschool director out-of-district coordinator, which would allow, I think, just even in the context of geography, that those are both located here within the high school, with the exception of the Downey classrooms proposed for next year, allows for greater consistency as it relates to preschool as a whole. We do also look at places where we have made changes in the past that allows us to actually make progress from our staffing delivery model. So this budget does propose a reduction of a 1.0 FTE in middle school special education teacher at Thurston. This is possible because the change we made in the FY26 budget, where we added additional adjustment counselor staffing at Thurston, that really helped shore up our therapeutic learning center program, our TLC program at Thurston, and success of this addition and analysis of our service delivery across Thurston as a whole allows for a reduction of special ed staffing at Thurston without compromising student support in FY27. Moving now to a conversation around elementary class size. So school committee policy establishes class size guidelines that recommend 18 to 22 students in grades K to 3, 18 to 24 students in grades 4 through 5, and I'm just quoting from the policy here that these are guidelines rather than absolute limits. I know we've had some conversation this year about Pine Hill grade 1. We know Sheehan grade 5 is currently over our guidelines for the current year. So given the fiscal challenges in this year's budget, the proposed FY27 staffing includes the reduction of 3 FTE elementary classroom positions for 26-27. And the result of these reductions, there would be one grade level in each elementary school that exceeds those class size guidelines by up to 2 students. That'd be grade 4 at Downey at 26 students, grade 1 at MJ at 22 to 23 students, grade 2 at Pine Hill at 24 students, and grade 5 at Sheehan at 25 to 26 students. I'm just going to, I'll come back to the chart in a second, but this decision is not, or this proposal is not taken lightly. It is only made in the context of the incredibly challenging financial situation that we currently have. And the reality is, if each of those 4 grades were aligned with class size guidelines, it would require additional 4.0 FTE, because the Pine Hill current grade 1 going to grade 2 is an existing problem that doesn't go away at a cost of over $350,000. And so to support these grade levels, we'd be examining how we can provide that additional support as determined by student need. For example, what we do right now is we examine how we deploy literacy and math specialists, how we deploy IA support, and that would be done at the school level with certainly support where we can provide it from the district office. This shows what the projected enrollment in classroom sections are by school and grade level. I'll caveat this on the kindergarten line, just saying again, this is assuming that like the 3rd classroom will be at Sheehan, that will be determined by enrollment, but this is designed to flatten those 7 sections across those 3 buildings. Sorry about that. But the areas in red are those areas where it's the number of students is the hard number, the number of sections in parentheses. And those are the 4 sections that are proposed that would be over class size guidelines. Continuing on with additional staffing changes, because there is the need to we talk about how large that financial gap is. There's a proposed reduction of a 1.0 FTE high school math teacher. It would reduce the total number of math sections of the high school from 52 to approximately 49. The reason that's not a full 5-section reduction is because we do have some FTE in math that are currently teaching some classes in the science department. But we are confident that this would allow us to maintain instruction intervention models with a manageable class size increase. We are proposing reducing a 1.0 elementary instructional technology coach. This was a position that we just added 2 years ago in the FY25 budget, as we allowed for a weekly digital literacy and computer science special once a week in grades 2 through 5. The people in the ITC roles provide both DLCX instruction directly to students, and they do coaching and professional development for staff in the area of technology. We are not, with this proposal, reducing the student instructional component. When I talked previously about maintaining student access to educational opportunities, we would not be reducing that part of the role. but we would be reducing down from 4 to 3 FTE in the district, effectively reducing our capacity for teacher coaching and professional development.
So is that person doing 100% what's part of coaching versus students?
Everybody is doing some of both.
Some of both.
The distribution is a little bit skewed because of the buildings and the relative size of the buildings. And so when we look at calibrating the distribution of the teaching component, Pine Hill is the largest school currently. I mean, right now there's one in each school.
Got it.
Pine Hill is the largest school, has the largest teaching component. They have 16, that teacher has 16 sections of DLCS. The other 3 schools combined have about 32, 33, right? And so we would have 2 teachers cover those 2 schools, and we would calibrate what part of the time is teaching versus what part of the time is coaching and PD. The next reduction is we are proposing reducing a 1.0 FTE Director of Social Emotional Learning in the district. I will talk about like how difficult this is as we talk about a member of our own team, but given the incredibly challenging fiscal climate, we cannot financially sustain the director level position as it currently is constituted. We remain committed to the importance of SEL. It is a core part of our strategy for district improvement. We are continuing having identified staff equity leaders in each school. But this reduction will have an impact on our coordination, on our implementation, on how we best support our SEL work at the elementary level, our advisory work at the middle school level. And it's going to be a heavy lift this spring to identify how our remaining structures can best support continuing this work in the district, knowing that we would be losing a core member of our team. But at the same time, again, this is a incredibly challenging fiscal climate. And we have to make proposed decisions in that context. There is one addition here. It's an addition of a 0.4 FTE high school wellness teacher. This is the second phase of the plan that we started in FY26 for all high school students to have yearly wellness classes. This was originally proposed as a 1.0 last year. We made some changes to the schedule that allowed us to implement this over a 2-year phase. But this is really about ensuring that all students experience physical and social emotional health benefits of wellness education, as well as supporting all students to meet local and state graduation requirements. In some other areas, we are proposing reducing a 0.38 FTE for science material support. That's at the elementary level, supporting elementary science, given the variety of supplies that would need to be absorbed by existing staff. We are proposing reducing a 1.0 FTE high school custodian. That eliminates a position that is vacant due to a recent resignation, and that would just be work again that would have to be absorbed by existing staff. One positive note in this area is that we were actually able to capture about $91,000 in savings in FY27 from professional staff retirement. There was a new provision in the teacher collective bargaining agreement we ratified last year, that we all collectively ratified last year, that incentivized early retirement notification. We had some employees that took advantage of that, so that allowed us to capture turnover savings in the development of the FY27 budget. We are not, to the point that I made earlier about preserving student educational access opportunities and about the importance of our commitment to having multi-tiered support so that we can bring stability and control to the needs of our students. We are not proposing any change to our staffing levels in literacy math specialists. What we are committed to doing, though, is looking to how we reallocate those specialists. And it's not on the slides, but it's in your budget book. Also, how we reallocate related service providers to the point in the report, psychologists, SLPs, et cetera. And we do that sort of historically annually. But there is no change to proposed staffing levels for literacy and math specialists. We are committed to allocating staff level based upon student needs as identified through our universal screens and through other assessment data. From a technical perspective, we've consolidated. Historically, this had been 4 separate budget lines in literacy, 4 separate budget lines in math, 1 for each school. They're now consolidated into 1 district line. And that we will have follow-up discussions about those allocations in the spring, because we want to be able to use the results. Now that we have put in, we have structures built around like fall, winter, spring universal screens. Spring is too late. But we want to be able to use the winter screening data, particularly along with the fall data, to inform our allocations. Moving finally to the capital budget, and
Should we pause?
Yeah, let's pause here. I think that's probably a good place to pause. Thank you.
I know we've been, we've had a little bit of a preview before this. Does anyone have thoughts, questions on the operating budget?
I guess to start on a positive note, I will say I'm thankful for all of the upfront communication directly from you, Tim, budget book and an individual phone call to preview this, so that we're not taken aback by all of this information, because it is a lot. The other thing that I think I observed when we discussed this is that it's there's nothing that isn't touched. So it's trying to spread the trying to distribute the reductions evenly, which I appreciate as well. But it is really disappointing in a lot of ways.
Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I have a question and a broader comment. Not to bring it back Mandarin, but Mandarin, I thought we were going to go down by 0.4 to 0.2. I know it's not a huge thing, but it just.
Yeah, I mean, based upon the students we still have enrolled in the Mandarin program, at this stage in game, it is potentially fluctuating between a 0.4 and a 0.2. There may be a need for a post-budget conversation around that, depending. We just haven't done course selections yet, so we can't address that definitively at this point in time. I don't know how much more it gets us realistically from a budget perspective, but we're examining that as well too.
Yeah, I mean, my other observation is, and I've said this in the past, is I'm troubled by the STEM reductions. It's 2.4. We made a science reduction a couple years ago. It's not where the world's going. It's not where undergraduate degrees are going. So it'd be helpful to understand how those decisions are made. And I have a slight disagreement on one thing, just with you. I think we hit elementary. I think the high school continues to have reductions. I haven't seen a lot of general ed reductions at the school down the street. So it's just an observation. And I can go back through other budget books and confirm that. But I know there's a teaming model. Yeah. I know, but I think it's just, if you want to, it's just a question how these decisions are made.
Yeah, I'll address that a little bit when I talk about future budget considerations. I think and this challenge is not unique to Westwood,
yep.
Right? The middle school teaming model limits the ability to reduce a teacher in one department in a way that you can at a high school, yep. Or limits the ability to reduce one teacher in one elementary school at one grade level in the way that you could in elementary school, without violating the integrity of the team structure, right? There are cases where, and I have certainly seen this in my past, where enrollment fluctuates to the point where you go from, I know one of my former schools where we had 3 teams, we went down to 2.5. You can do a half team model. Our enrollment has not reached a point where that is a viable consideration. And I would be hard pressed to think we will ever be in a place where we are fewer than 2 teams in a middle school teaming model. And so structurally, the commitment of that model limits the ability to have that conversation around subjects that are on team. I'll preview that, one of the things that is not in this budget that we talked about a year ago, and you'll see it on a future slide, is this need to explore the commitment we still want to make to expanding world language to grade 6. In doing that, we also need to look at sort of the middle school structure and schedule as a whole. In that conversation, that may lead to some other areas that are identified. I don't know what those are yet because we need to go through that process in a really thoughtful way that is informed not just by that curriculum review, the impact of, I'll say just from a personal level, I think health should be taught in every grade of the middle school level, and it's not currently. But we're also going through other curriculum review processes at the same time. So we need to be in a place where we can take all that information and have that conversation in a more meaningful way. And I think to your larger point, I am not optimistic that the struggles we are currently facing in FY27 are a one-time event. Unless there is something dramatic that happens from a tax revenue perspective, because that is there is some windfall at the state level that I don't think any of us are anticipating right now. we continue to have costs that are escalating at a level greater than what Prop 2.5 allows. And so whether that is through new growth or some other, we may be in the same situation a year from now. So some of the things that may not be on the table in this year's budget may not be a question of if, they may be a question of when. And I'm sorry to lay it, but I think everybody on this committee knows that, but I think it's important to share that more broadly for the community as a whole.
And the only way to get around that is with an override. And I think we've heard from the community that property taxes are top of mind for everybody, and that there is no appetite in this community for an override. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but the reality is that's why we are where we are today, in this place that none of us want to be. There's just, there's no other way to get around it.
I mean, I'll follow up with you. It still doesn't answer my question. I understand the constraints, but it doesn't still ask my question. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
We'll follow.
Okay.
Anything else?
And, I echo Dory that I appreciate the preview of this and the opportunity to sit with it for a little bit, so it's not hitting us, in real time at this moment. What I want to commend Dilemma for the creative thinking during negotiations to think of creative ways to incentivize early retirement announcements. I mean, the way I see that's a person. That's a position that was saved by knowing ahead of time.
Tim for that too. We were both at the table, and he played an important role in that.
But
But it's been important.
Yeah.
It does put pressure on next year, so that's one of the downsides of it. But it was that's worthwhile.
Right.
I much rather take the pressure next year, and improve our ability to preserve positions. It doesn't feel like we're preserving positions, but we did with that retirement savings piece.
That's how I see it too. So thank you. I echo your concern about the STEM reductions. I don't know a way around that. I mean, and Tim and I talked a little bit about this, but I question whether or not the movement to the 0.4 FTE offsets the reduction in math or science. I understand that that's not a one-to-one. I understand that that doesn't necessarily relieve the pressure significantly in that other area, but I don't love a reduction in math and science in this stage. And yeah, I'm not thrilled about this. Oh, I had a question about, I know in negotiations and in conversations with the town, we're presenting a pretty, challenging budget and with significant cuts. Was there conversation about would we be seeing similar cuts at the town level? And are those conversations, are they having those conversations as well? I guess I want to know if we're sharing the challenges across town and district.
Yeah. So the town doesn't necessarily share the line items of their budget the way we do. So, at this time, I don't know the answer to that question. Rob Gotti, the chair, has been saying in his meetings that they are finding this budget, and has told us in budget steering that they are particularly challenged this year as well. They expect to see significant impact as well to their budget. I don't think they've released their budget yet, so.
I think Monday.
Yeah, I think Monday. I think we'll learn a lot more then.
Okay.
But, these conversations, we were very transparent in those meetings that we felt this was very painful to the school. And I think the town was sort of understanding that and echoing that. I think a little bit of that is what you see in the increase in the higher, increase percentage that we got. I think the pain is going to be felt everywhere. We are feeling it very acutely. So we'll see what they say on Monday on how they've experienced it. But we haven't they haven't, we sort of shared our numbers, and I think they will share theirs eventually.
One more question. Tim, you talked a little bit in the beginning about advocacy and how your superintendent colleagues are advocating at the state level for additional reimbursements or some pressure relief on some of these lines. Is there anything that the community can do to help reinforce that message? Is this a call to our representatives to help bubble up that communication?
Yeah, part of that, the challenge. Yes, but let me provide some context first, right? So I think that there is a real challenge with the budget cycle we have in this community and the timing of the budget cycle. And I know Town Hall shares this concern as well, right? Which is that by town charter, the town budget needs to be presented by, I think it's January 31st, or whatever,
February
right?
1st.
February 1st, yeah, whatever that date is. But the governor's budget basically comes out on the last Friday in January, which is too late to really make meaningful response to what comes out in the governor's budget. And then what is also really challenging is that whenever it comes out in the governor's budget, and when we talk about that, that's really Chapter 70 aid, but then there's also other state assessments and charges and state, local aid that comes in there. The legislature always does something with that, and the legislature never decreases that, it usually goes up, but that increase doesn't happen until July or August, which is well after town meeting, and that winds up finding its way into free cash ultimately, but that doesn't help our budget conversation at the time, right? So, for this year, or for the future, I would say like the number one item on our advocacy platform from the Superintendent Association is about increasing the % reimbursement for circuit breaker. Again, not to get into a whole circuit breaker sort of diatribe, but we could reimburse 75% of all costs over, and again, I'll say 50,000 to make the math easier. It's a little bit higher than that, but 75% of all costs for a student above $50,000. Our number one item on our advocacy platform is that should be raised to 90%. And if that were raised, then that means more money that actually comes directly back to the schools as receipts. It doesn't like go into the pie in Chapter 70 and then gets distributed through free cash. That is direct money that comes into the schools that then can be used to offset future tuitions. So like that is a place where advocacy could happen. If that February 1st date in the charter were changed, and I'm by the way, I'm speaking way out of the scope of my own personal role and responsibilities here. But if that were pushed back a month until March 1st, or even 2 weeks, that would allow us to have a different kind of conversation around at least knowing the governor's budget numbers before we have to lock a budget in, right? Those are some things that are really tangible. One is from an advocacy perspective at the state level. One is from a local identification of a challenge perspective. And I know they're like what the impact is downstream for FinCom and notification for residents for open town meeting and all those things. Like that's a real thing that would need to be worked out. But the choking of the budget process at this stage hampers our ability to be responsive to what is happening at the state level from the budget perspective.
Sounds like another citizen's petition.
That's what I was going to say. I'm like, I know
Change
people
the
who will
charter.
pick this up.
Again,
Yeah, we'll
that is
change the
out-
charter.
I'm speaking way beyond my scope of
We
jurisdictional
can change
authority
that
there.
charter.
I'm glad you shared that though, because I know that the cherry sheet is coming out soon, but I didn't.
It's literally
I think it's
Friday.
It's Friday,
Yeah.
right?
Comes out
And
Friday.
so it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
Like I knew that, but I never really thought about,
Yep.
the whole collective. So I'm glad you make that point.
Yeah, I know people who are very active in our community who would love to take on some of this.
Anything else for capital budget?
I was looking at the slides early on, and I did sort of, we all know I'm not a mathematician, some back of the envelope math, but that 1%, right, is about $1 million change. And that's with us being, as they noted, really low out of district. That 1% is very low, and is still makes an impact.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a credit to the hard work that's going on that it's not higher than 1%.
Yes. Yeah, without question, right? And I've shared with Maya, like I have conversations with my colleagues about where their budget pressures are. We are not isolated in feeling these experiencing pressures right now. I without naming the district, I have a relative who lives in a nearby, not like a budding, but relatively nearby district that they're currently facing a 10% budget increase. Now they're a regional, and they have to absorb not only the special ed costs but also the insurance costs in a way that we don't have to locally. But like these are some real numbers that are out there, and the fact that there is an unsustainability to the current financial model that is felt statewide, with what I don't see are solutions to that unsustainability in the near term coming. But doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying.
Okay, should we move to capital?
Sure. We'll move to capital budget. So our annual capital increases from 1.4 to 1.28 million, with some shifting of priorities between categories. Essentially, this is the money that goes into technology, FF&E, HVAC, roofing, building improvement, security, copiers, vehicles. The priorities for the annual budget this year, we have to do a refresh cycle in technology for the huge influx of devices that were purchased during the beginning of the pandemic. They're hitting the end of their life cycle, and so we have an obligation to ensure that there are funds that are there. I want to give Steve a ton of credit for actually having a well-thought-out multi-year financial plan for how we address the refresh cycle, but that's certainly a priority in the I keep doing that, I apologize. Priority in the annual capital budget. Another priority is to restore some depleted funds. We are allowed to carry over some funds from year to year because of the way that projects may ebb and flow. Certainly some work we've done in roofing, certainly some work we've done in building improvements. We need to restore some of those depleted funds. And there's a priority of a multifunction student activity bus or van that's in progress, and a proposed food truck for cafeteria. There's some other capital requests about HVAC improvements at Thurston. We know that we will be submitting for Thurston, but we also know we have an entire generation of students, or actually I guess 2 generations potentially of middle school students coming through that building before we could even possibly contemplate opening a new Thurston. And so we want to make sure that those students and our staff in the building are able to be in a safe environment. And so we're looking to, this is one of those Band-Aid fixes as opposed to a scalpel fix. And to replace the aging voice over IP phone control at the high school, which acts as a relay for other buildings, and to replace the PA system.
That's going to be through a special article, that 380 is.
Yeah.
Just to call out the fact that we're not proposing that there's a taco truck outside the school, that this is a food truck that carries food from school to school.
Yes. I appreciate that clarity. Yes, this is not a for-profit food truck. This is our cafeteria. We may want to change that verbiage then as we present later on. So.
Just make that clear to the community.
Vehicle, maybe.
Yeah, cafeteria delivery vehicle.
Yeah.
That's better.
Just talking about comparisons of future priorities, we share this chart every year. These are the top public high schools for 2025. The list of high schools has been updated. DESE still has not updated the per pupil spending for numbers since FY23. And
We're
so
back to bashing DESE now.
Yeah, there were some nice things said. And by the way, I do agree with Bill's comment about their MTSS and educator evaluation stuff. But yeah, this is one of the areas where they need some improvement. Last year they came out on January 30th, but we just don't have FY24 numbers yet, even though we're currently talking about budgeting for FY27. But the concept behind this chart is like, we are continuing to get good value for our educational buck here. And when we talk about future priorities, and these are all identified in the back of the book, the class size conversation we're having this year, we know like it is a priority to address that in the future, hopefully, right? And so there's a desire to restore class sizes within guidelines for future budgets, and we will need to have that conversation in FY28. We talked earlier in response to your question, Tony, about the expansion of middle school world language and health that requires an examination of program and scheduling. We have other ongoing curriculum reviews. I think the one that may have the most immediate direct sort of one-time financial impact is K-5 literacy. And I think that the fact that that review is ongoing dovetails well with what we heard in the report as well too, about really focusing on evidence-based early literacy approaches. But there'll be some level of one-time priority there, but there may also be whatever like structural implications there are that come out of those reviews. We've had the district data analyst on this list for a number of years now. It is still there, but given the context of everything else, it's just not a viable immediate solution. And we flatlined utility costs, and we continue to have these sort of ins and outs as it relates to utility costs. We do have a new electricity contract with the town that is starting January 1st of 2027.
Mid-year.
Mid-year in this budget cycle. But we're also going to be able to fully activate the solar canopy at the high school and what that will, so we would be in a lot worse place with utilities if we were not making the investments in renewable energy that we have as a district and as a community. But it's something that, whether that's an up or a down, we're going to have to address in a future budget as a priority. So for next steps, I did not, my apologies for not putting the two meetings next week, but January 26th, we're having the meeting with CPAC on special education. January 28th, we're having the school committee office hours. Those are both at 7 p.m. The CPAC meeting is both in person here at the high school and virtual. The school committee office hours is solely on Zoom, and we'll be sending that information out directly to families tomorrow. We are working to schedule the finance committee presentation and budget hearing, so that's a TBD right now. And the annual town meeting is May 4th, 2026. So, that's the last slide, and thank you for bearing with me as I went through. There's obviously a lot here. And, I want to thank, the team that's here in the room, and those that are not in the room as well, too. These have been some really challenging conversations and conversations we don't want to have. And as I said up front, we're not presenting a budget that any of us feel great about. But what we are doing is presenting a budget that is what we believe is the best of a bunch of bad options, but allows us to maintain our commitment to children in the district. And that is really the approach and the lens that we're working to take with this. And I thank them for their thoughtfulness and candor in our conversations. And we will continue to move forward because we don't have any other choice but to do that on behalf of kids. So thank you and I'll certainly, if there are further questions, whether it's tonight or whether it's in the future, and I look forward to the engagement opportunities with the community as well.
Anything further on the budget?
No, thank you. Obviously, thank you for all the work. And just at some point, I think those future priorities should be talked about.
Re-examined?
Some of them, maybe.
Yeah.
We got, and we even got more, I don't want to say more, there were some ads even we heard earlier in the hour. So I think those just need to be looked at in the context of if it is going to be, I'm not saying hopefully it's a better year next year, but if it's, even if it's a flat year next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are budget priorities as of, the January 21st, 2026, and they may not be the priorities on, I can't imagine the class size one won't be a priority conversation, right? But some of the other ones may not be a priority in January of 2027.
I want to also acknowledge, I appreciate the willingness to share resources across the district. I think that will be really impactful in terms of, equity across the district. So I appreciate that.
Are you communicating do you do that like an email? Or
Yeah, so first I want to make sure that I communicate the details of this directly to staff in the district.
Yep.
So that will happen tomorrow, earlier in the day. But then I think I think we should have some conversation. We can have this conversation offline about whether or not we are just communicating the dates and then the details separately, or if we're communicating all of those simultaneously. But we don't need to have that conversation right here, right now. We can talk right after the meeting. So.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Moving on to action items. So our first action item is a vote to accept a donation from Meditech. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? This is a large donation. I think it's an annual donation,
Yeah,
right?
it's an annual donation.
Every year?
And you have I don't mean to put you up to it, Steve, but
What?
we've had a bunch of just awful conversation over the last hour and a half, so, or last hour. So I don't know if you want to say anything about the memo, or I can read from the memo. Not to put you on the spot, but I want to give you credit, so.
No, I want to give Meditech credit.
Can you come up, just so that Westwood Media Center can catch you? We're really putting you on the spot.
No, Meditech has been a great, I was talking to Joanna about this earlier. It predates my being in this position, but because they do business in the town of Westwood, they provide this annual donation. And Yeah, it's been going on every year, and we've received $20,000 this year. We use it for professional development, curriculum work, funding innovative programs. I'm thinking about the DLCS special, and some of the funding was very instrumental in helping with that. So they're a great partner, and certainly would suggest, recommend that you approve this grant donation.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Can I have a motion to approve a donation of $20,000 from Meditech?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Our last action item is a vote to approve the December 10th, 2025 meeting minutes. Can I get a vote to approve the minutes?
Second.
Any discussion on them? All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Any new business? Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. We are adjourned.